thinking it would be a little bit of a slow night, but apparently we had some last minute drop-ins, which is always great. So, welcome to everybody again. I'm Cujo. We got Dan. We got Dave. Alex will not be joining us this evening because he is racing. So he is at Champs. So, best of luck to him, and hopefully he does really well, um, and
And
doesn't break his
Champs
stuff.
is multi has his one drone. Champs is multi GP and happening in Florida.
hmm So, um, it's a light news week, to be honest. There are some big, well, there's one bigger story, I would say, but the rest is kind of small. But I am going to share this. Let me see here. Go live with this. So this is coming from obviously UAS Weekly. Let me drop the link in the channel here. I am a little bit behind here. Okay. So this comes from UAS Weekly. Drone announces a successful citywide airspace security deployment. So long story short with this is Drone is a market leader in airspace security. They do a lot of uh, drone detection type stuff. And they are saying that they are able to deploy their technology across um, basically a city. Think about something like this in terms of like a historical site, um, or something like that, where they can, limit the amount of drone activity in those areas. Um, they are stating, and this is interesting. I don't know. I don't know a lot about drone, to be honest. Obviously, some others do, but they're stating that their software and trackers can detect up to 300 different types of drones just based on signals emitted or visual characteristics. And they also state that their software is going to enable their customers to read and interpret data from both U.S. and European Union remote ID data. So it's pretty interesting. I did go to Drone's website just to kind of see, but obviously they give you a very brief rundown in these little flashcards. But the second you want to dive deeper into their stuff, it's locked behind oh, send us a your email address and we'll send you information. And I hate stuff like that. If you're going to be upfront about it, be upfront about it. Don't try and hide behind, marketing ploys. But at the same time, pretty interesting. This is the kind of stuff that I don't like about remote ID is certain organizations keying in on that information and providing it to their private customers on a, always on kind of basis. It feels too, big brother to me, as if remote ID wasn't big brother enough, but it's a little odd. But one of the more interesting articles I saw this week. Any thoughts on that?
Apparently, XJet is not a fan.
I see that.
You know, I did an investigation into D-Drone when they were sort of making a lot of noise a while ago. They put a video up, a promotional video showing a phantom dropping drugs into a prison through the window, which was actually a vertical window. So the phantom was somehow able to get the drugs from the phantom into the window of the prison. And it was like complete fiction, utter fiction. And anyone that knew anything about drones
That's
realized this was
hilarious.
utter BS, to use the abbreviation, and that shot their credibility to hell and back. And they've never been really delivering on anything they've promised, as far as I'm aware. I could be wrong, always like to be wrong. But yeah, it's just another one of these counter UAS companies that sees an opportunity to
Yeah.
promise the earth and deliver a pile of dirt.
And it's funny too. Every time I go, news hunting for articles for the town hall and just what's going on in the space, it's I think honestly that there are more counter UAS companies than there are drones in the sky sometimes because everybody seems to want to be in on this space. And there's a new company every time I look that I've never heard of, and
It's al-
it's getting a
w-
little
it's
ridiculous.
it's also interesting. I'm on the Drone and Sundry webcast
Hmm.
from SUAS News, and we've invited D-Drone to appear on the program many, many times, and they've steadfastly refused because I think they realise they'd get ripped to pieces by people who know what they're talking about.
Yeah. Well, pretty interesting. I'd never, to be honest with you, I'd never heard of drone until I found this article. But always willing to check out a
Yeah,
new counter UAS company.
Voltronics brings up a good point, which is taking a drone out of the sky in the United States is a felony. So it's taking down an aircraft, and so it's more than just an FAA regulation. So that's positive, and but we still have some significant work to do, and that is, of course, that remote ID identifies the location of the operator, and that's causing issue. And happily, Vic Moss, a colleague as well as a DAC member, is taking this up with the FAA, and they're listening, and so we'll see if anything happens. We do know that DHS very much wants real-time identification of the location of the operator, and of course, there's two different sets of location. One if it's a standard remote ID UAS, one if it's a UAS with a broadcast module.
Yeah. So, and the difference between those is if it's a standard remote ID, i.e., one that has it built in, and these would be like your standard DJI, Skydio, type drones. Um, your drone itself will broadcast its location, and your transmitter is supposed to broadcast its location. Now, second to that is, with the broadcast module, the drone is doing all the work. It will report its location, but it will also report its takeoff location. So, which will identify, theoretically, where the operator
Unless you take
is in the
off and
general
run.
vicinity.
Yeah, interesting though. Did you see that someone was attacked flying their drone in Honolulu or something, in Hawaii or something,
I
yes, the other
didn't.
day? Yeah, and it shows that there is this very real risk of attack when
Yeah.
you're focused on flying a drone. So and the FAA has not given any credible reason why they can't encrypt that particular piece of the remote ID stream so it's not available to the public. All they
Right.
say is call the police when you get mugged. That's, to me, that's totally unacceptable.
I'd say
Right.
there's
Well,
been
and
more
That's
cases of people being
that's what.
attacked flying drones than drones hitting aircraft.
Yeah, that's for sure. We
yeah.
have 6 over 5 years. So yeah, that's what Vic Moss is so explicitly. We've had a number of uh, flight or pilots, Part 107 pilots, attacked, as well as their drones destroyed. So yeah, we've firearms involved, people being beat up. That's what we're going through right now, and that's what we're putting on the table as a complaint. And Bruce, that's exactly the recommendation we've been having is, come on, let's just encrypt, that, so you want public safety or law enforcement to get the location of the operator, fine, but not the general public.
But every time that
Certainly
comes up, the FAA gives a very convoluted answer saying, yes, we understand it's an issue. We're looking into
we're
it.
doing it for safety, and
Right.
and it's DHS, and we've been on this since the response to the
Yeah.
NPRM as well.
And I mean, there's a couple different levels too, right? So, there's the distraction level. You've got a drone pilot who's flying, and somebody comes up and either, and we've all had it happen, right? You're flying, and somebody wants to know the particulars, and there's that shirt floating around. Yes, it goes fast. It can go really high. Blah 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 blah. But the issue is that becomes now a distracted pilot, and while you may have a spotter that can mitigate some of those questions or concerns, then you've got the bigger issue of people who obviously don't approve of drones, and they come up yelling and screaming, and that becomes even a bigger distraction. And distraction's a bad deal when it comes to anything that's moving through the air, as distraction can lead to an accident. Which at which point if something, God forbid, tragic happens, then the drone pilot will be held responsible for the issues of being distracted while somebody else is yelling. And then
But
even further than
there
that, you've got assaults and that kind of
there
thing.
was
So
an indictment and of the a Florida man. So that and he had the wisdom to take a sheriff's department drone out of the sky with a rifle. So
Wow,
yeah,
that one's a
so
15-year-old boy as well. Yikes.
I'm robbed. Wow.
Yeah, I don't see the FAA
Cool.
going back on this at all, because it's like the main point of remote ID is that the public can identify the drone that's flying over their head with their phone.
But here's the thing is like, yeah, there's a drone. So call the people who can, find that information. I'm honestly, there's certain circumstances, where I'm perfectly fine law enforcement having that kind of information, or first responders. You've got a forest fire and some dingleberry decides that they want to fly their drone to see the fire. Well, you're impeding access to the fire planes and helicopters and stuff that need to actually be over there. And entire divisions of these things will have to be stood down anytime they detect a drone. And that's a bad deal. So identifying who that person is, yeah, I'm for that. Because if you don't, what's the ramifications of not being able to get your fire planes in the air, right? So, it's a whole, there's certain things where I'm okay with. There's other things where it's just like, yeah, no. But it's something that needs to be worked out, and I feel like, and we've always said this, that only certain parties need to have access to that information. So, anywho, I'll get off my soapbox on that. It's a rather tall soapbox. All right, so I'll say the most interesting thing for last, but Skydio, which I was able this last, goodness, when was that? Was that last week that I went, or the week before last? I can't remember. But I did go to the AZ Drone Fest for a couple hours. Happened on Grand Canyon University campus. Small event, but definitely some cool things happening there. And I got to actually, see a Skydio drone for the first time. Pretty impressive little pieces of equipment. But Skydio and Axon, if you're not familiar who Axon is a company who they own Taser International, which is headquartered here in Scottsdale, Arizona. They also do a lot of they have developed and implement body cams for police officers, and they also have software where that body cam footage will get input into, it's called Axon Evidence, and organizations who are running Axon Evidence and utilizing Skydio drones will be able to input their Skydio drone footage into Axon Evidence and have it kind of cataloged in there for review. I do believe Axon also is kind of like a third-party reviewer of said body cam / now Skydio drone footage. So I'm not 100% on that, so don't quote me on that. But they Skydio and Axon have partnered up with that. So pretty interesting how if first responders or police are going to be using Skydio as their chosen drone solution or UAS solution, then if they're utilizing other Axon products, then they can kind of merge it all together. So that was kind of interesting. What are your guys' thoughts on drones and police? Buddy?
yeah,
I'm,
yeah.
they're
Anyone
a
actually
use-
kinda
they're
curious on
they're a
that.
useful tool for sure,
Mm-hmm.
but definitely a lot of people have concerns about police in general, and more tools to allow them to do things that they may not approve of.
So long as I can get
I
my
would-
phone out and tell exactly where the operator is standing, I'll be happy.
Yeah, we had the I,
That's
I got to
funny.
meet I got to meet one of the 17 fire department of New York full-time drone pilots, and so this is they come out and staff large fires around Manhattan, and they're tied in with the incident commander, and so providing great assistance. And they've been in service now 3 years, so and grown to 17 pilots, and a couple of them are getting interested in FPV, which is a great thing.
Nice.
They've been flying large DJI drones. They just need to hover and sway and monitor, and they've been proven really useful. So to me, from that perspective, you know, could be invaluable, and that it's a great surveillance of an emergency.
Hmm. So we got Volatronics said they still need to obey property rules and warrant needs, and this was actually a discussion many years ago I had with some Phoenix police officers regarding this, and this one in particular, he was um, I met him when he was doing off-duty work, but he wrote a lot of the kind of regulation suggestions for Phoenix police, and we were talking a lot about drones and drone use, and one of the things that he said is that it would be a very complex kind of warrant or needs based idea to utilize drones. And I haven't, since then, to be honest, I haven't done any kind of deep dive into, how different departments are utilizing them or, the process in which that they are required to go through to use them. But I'm actually curious now, so I might dive
Yeah,
down that rabbit
I
hole.
guess I used the word surveillance, and I should have said to surveil. And
Yeah.
certainly, their drones are being actively used in search and rescue with FLIRs and
Mhm.
uh,
Absolutely.
other infrared type cameras.
Yep.
I
It was
assume
one of the
Nos's comment there is relating to especially in Canada, where the police have flown their drone into aircraft a couple of times now.
Oops.
Well, he's like,
Oops.
"Yep."
And this is why we need remote ID.
Oh goodness. Well, let's hope some of these departments have somebody good who's training them on how to use these things. So,
Safety relies on hope a lot these days.
Yeah, if only there was as
so,
many companies out there trying to teach police and firemen how to fly as there are companies out there trying to knock drones out of the sky.
mhm. All right. So, last before we get to our probably more thought-provoking article. This one I actually saw before I searched it, and I had to go see if there was a news article on
Oh,
it.
I got an email
So,
about this one, I think, too, from AirViews.
but yeah, I saw this one on Twitter probably yesterday or the day before. So Anthony, it's a commercial basically, where Anthony Edwards, who is a point guard for the Minnesota Timberwolves, walks into an office and he literally puts a basketball down on the ground, puts a Cinewhoop essentially down on the ground. He's like, "Hey, can I borrow your office for a second?" And sits on the basketball with a pair of DJI goggles on and proceeds to fly through the office. And there's different, like, he goes and harasses the mascot, and um mascot tries to kind of swat it out of the air, and he goes and messes with a bunch of people, and then he ends up running into A-Rod, who is one of the team's new owners, and I think he knocks the drone down with a baseball or something like that. But it was a cute video and it was funny. And Drone DJ is saying it's possible that he isn't actually the pilot, and I don't think he is. I kind of went a little deeper, and there was a company that, and I can't remember the name of the company, but there was a company that had done the work. But it's cool that to see somebody of a kind of celebrity status and FPV drones kind of making it mainstream and stuff like this. It's definitely a really neat thing.
Yeah, I
So,
believe
um,
the company that was really behind this video was the same one that made that bowling alley video that sort of went viral a couple months back.
yep,
And
yeah, I think
it's
they
a
mentioned that here.
drone video company from the Twin Cities area. So my neck
So
of
let
the
me see
woods.
if I can play this video here.
Hey, you mind if I sit right here? Oh, let's see what we got, man.
Watch his thumbs. Does it look like he's flying?
Yeah, it kind of does. Yeah.
Get back here! Oh, Kurt, you missed him. How'd you let him get away? Yeah, hey, who's that? Seriously, dude?
This is a no-fly zone. Hey, stop! Stop right there! I need backup now.
Yo, I'm in the middle of my set here. Come on.
It's definitely sort of a popular format these days to go fly around some business like that.
Yeah, it is. I think Cinewhoops have done a lot of great things for FPV and even just media. Oh, it was a baseball bat. And then he goes and runs off. So pretty cool. Definitely a neat thing.
Yeah, see if that had
All
remote
right.
ID on it, the guy who knocked it out of the air could have figured out who was the pilot and where they were.
I think it was stage Volatronics. I think every bit of that was actually scripted, but it was still a cool video. All right, so last but not least, so and you'll have to forgive me because I've been working a whole heck of a lot lately. So I haven't had an opportunity to actually read through the response, but this comes from the UAV Law News and Discussion Facebook group, and Brendan had basically made a comment on the
Well,
RDQ response.
First of all, he's pointing out that a new, what brief was it that was
Yes.
posted?
Yeah, it was a new response, and this will be the last response before arguments go to the oral stage.
And I don't know if you can zoom in on that at all, but the font's super tiny for us.
Okay.
Or
let's
just
see.
zoom in your browser at all. Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
little better.
There we go.
Yeah, that he posted that there's the petitioners in that case have filed their brief. Whatever, I don't know enough about legal cases to know what that means.
I believe the petitioners would be RDQ / Tyler Brennan. So,
Correct.
basically, the way this works is that Tyler and his team submitted their essentially complaint in the lawsuit, and then the FAA was able to respond to the complaint in written form. And then a VUC kind of stepped in and filed an amicus brief. I have not read the amicus brief, but I know they did that. And then Tyler and his team were granted an opportunity to respond to both the FAA's response and presumably the amicus brief from a VUC. So basically what Brendan is saying here is, in his opinion, and Brendan is a lawyer. He was lead counsel for DJI for many, many years.
So he's not just some
Um,
random guy on the internet posting his conspiracy
No.
theories.
No, not at all. And
And he's
I'm
got a
not.
robot dog.
If he
Yeah,
doesn't, he
now
will
works for
soon.
Fox.
Yeah, which is important from the perspective of he no longer works for DJI, so he does not have a dog in this hunt.
Yeah. So, but in his view, the argument that FAA remote violates a privacy interest because low altitude space is actually private property, citing the Cosby case, which is a case from 1936 involving the United States Air Force and a chicken farmer. Um, Basically saying that his farm was in the takeoff slash landing path of this particular Air Force base, and the airplanes were scaring his chickens literally to death. And so Cosby filed essentially a lawsuit, which resulted in the government performing what's called a taking. I've studied this quite a bit, and so essentially, he's saying that the private property is basically basing remote ID that it's violating a privacy interest based on Cosby is a strategic blunder. If that argument is successful, it will trigger a flood of state and local regulations and prohibitions on drone use. Now, this is something that I have talked about well in the past, but one of the things that had come up a couple years ago and is probably still sitting in a dark back room somewhere on the desk of, or in the drawers of the desk of Senator Mike Lee, um, is that when you start breaking up regulations on a state and local level versus an overriding kind of federal level, things can get messy. Um, in regards specifically to drone use. Imagine this: you're the federal level has one set of drone regulations. Then you live, let's say, or I'm going to take Arizona as an example because I live here. So then the state of Arizona basically legislates their own drone regulations, and then within that, the county of Maricopa, where I live, has their own legislates their own drone regulations, and then the city has their own, and so on and so forth. So it becomes a mess. And then if I go from, let's say I go from Phoenix over down to Tucson, I've now moved not only cities but counties, and both those could have different drone regulations than the ones I came from. And then couple that with, being a, let's say you run a drone business, doing aerial photography or 3D mapping or anything, and you travel from Arizona to Florida, that now you have to figure out what the drone regulations are there, and you could have accepted a job saying you could do it based on the regulations. You get there, things change. So it just becomes this nasty spider web of regulations that you can't escape.
Well, it could be even worse,
And
like where I live near the county border and a city border, and I could be standing in one spot and fly through three different, like, little tiny areas of
Mhm.
regulations that would say totally different things just from my backyard.
So, in terms of the way that this is, kind of coming across, that is what Brendan is saying could be a problem. Um, so I'm not, I can't speak, on a super knowledgeable level because I haven't read the response. I did read the original brief and I did read the FAA's response. I have not read this one yet.
I read it.
So, um,
I actually disagree with Brendan because what's being claimed is it's nothing to do with control or authority in that airspace, the ability to pass rules. It is saying that if I'm operating in my own property with a reasonable expectation of privacy, then remote ID removes that reasonable expectation because it allows authorities to effectively see what I'm doing in what should be a private space. And I think that's reasonable. If you're operating on your own property where you would expect to be operating privately, you should not be legally obliged to broadcast your permission or even the fact that you're flying. So, in that respect, remote ID does compromise your right to your right to privacy.
so, and again, I'm not a lawyer. I don't know. I get what you're saying, Bruce, and I don't disagree with you on that level. But then what you have is, and somebody I think mentioned it in the comments, so I'm very unashamedly stealing what they said, was that basically then you can have companies like Amazon utilizing private property as a thoroughfare to, kind of dodge regulations when it comes to that kind of stuff without, so it becomes kind of a mess. And I'm not saying that remote ID is the greatest thing since sliced bread. I'm very not with that train. But at the same time, I don't I see kind of an issue where uh if nobody is regulating that airspace in terms of what needs to happen in there, then somebody else is going to regulate it. And whether that be on a city or state, local level,
It's
if
not
you
ceding control though. It's not ceding control of the airspace in any way, shape, or form. It's totally to do with privacy. Whether you were flying a drone or sunbathing or whatever, it's totally the privacy issue, and it's the fact that the FAA most will have full control over whether you can or cannot fly in your backyard, and that would supersede any state or local jurisdictions. But it is the fact that you are entitled to a reasonable expectation of privacy when operating in your own private property in what should be a private area. So that it is taking it out of that and saying, look, it's nothing to do with aviation. It is solely to do with the right to privacy, and that's being usurped by remote ID. All the FAA has to do is say, if you are flying on your own property where there's a reasonable expectation of privacy, you do not have to activate your remote ID, because if you're on your own private property, people won't even know you're flying. So there's no need for them to say, oh, what's going on there?
Mhm. I get what you're saying, and I don't disagree. Thoughts, Dan, Dave?
Yeah,
Well,
if you're in if you're in controlled airspace, is that so you have to get Lance approval in the U.S. today, and you can only fly at 150 feet a max AGL. That's So where does this stop? And
it's
It
so
stops
yeah,
where it stops where you would expect people not to be able to see your craft. If you're flying above the fence in your property, then hey, yeah, you have to have remote ID, because you're now not expecting to be considered private because people can see your drone. But if you're flying under the bushes in the back garden, then you have a right to be able to do that without having to broadcast that fact to every man and dog, so they can creep in the front door of your house while you're out the back and steal your stuff.
It's a little bit similar like what TextJet is alluding to there. Like if your drone has remote ID on it and you're flying it indoors, your the FAA is forcing you to have remote ID even in a jurisdiction that isn't theirs.
yep.
Well,
Good
I don't think that's right. I don't think if you're flying indoors, you need to have remote ID activated
You wouldn't
unless it's
have to, but
built into the
you
system.
can't buy a drone. A drone can't be sold in the United States after a year from now that doesn't have remote ID that activates, whether it's indoors or not, because it doesn't know if it's
But
indoors, and you can't turn it off.
but, am- but built drones built by the hobbyists aren't required to have that. You can just take the module off, right?
No, but all of your off-the-shelf drones will be.
Yes.
Mind you, to put my practical hat on, who's going to be flying a drone larger than 250 grams indoors?
Well, I have done it. I've flown my 5-inch quadcopters inside of a go-kart track, indoors. So, I mean,
That
I've
video
done
we
it.
just watched of the Minnesota Timberwolves, that Cinewhoop was well over 250 grams.
Yeah.
enough, not
Just
something-
in
not
my
something I
10-inch
would do.
tricopter indoors. That's funny.
Looking from the outside, though, at the US situation, I'm still astounded. I know that this is a diktat that's been handed down to the FAA. You must introduce remote ID. It must be done. But I'm still looking at what is the problem that they're trying to solve here. They talk about this drone threat. Can someone please cite instances where drones have caused harm to people or property or compromised national security? These threats are ethereal. It's a huge amount of paranoia. And they say, oh, it's to stop bad actors. But in that case, why don't we have remote ID on cars? Because I'm pretty sure that every bad actor drives a car, but very few of them use drones. So we're ignoring the big threat and we're just focusing on the little threat that is yet to be realized after 10 years of drone use and many, many more years of model aircraft use. Why? I don't understand it here. From a totally security and safety perspective, there isn't the case to justify this kind of restriction as far as I can see.
Well, and I don't disagree. I don't think there has been a case that in the past that justifies it. I know where the security agencies are coming from, though. I mean, I can understand that aspect of what they think. Now, is it the appropriate way to think? I don't think so. But the potential, I think they're seeing drones as a very big potential for, uh, you know, basically, let's look at it this way. I mean, let's call it what it is: flying bombs, right? The potential is there for it. Now, whether somebody actually implements it or utilizes it, is another story.
Well, that
But
takes us back to the vehicle, though. The cars have been
Mhm.
used as bombs. It's been proven. We've had a
Absolutely.
truck
No, I know.
outside the FBI headquarters, or whatever, with the Unibomber, no, the bomber,
Yeah.
Oklahoma City bombing. So we've got a
Mhm.
proven risk there. What we have at the moment is a theoretical risk, and we're taking all these steps to try and control a theoretical risk, but not taking the same steps towards controlling the proven risks, which to me seems like mopping up the drink marks on the bar of the Titanic while there's an iceberg coming through the side.
I think part of this,
It's a
this is
great
just totally my opinion, but it goes back again to that broadcasting the location of the drone operator to the public, that there are people out there with some influence who have talked to regulators, Congress, whoever, and said, my neighbors are flying drones around and spying on me, and I want to know who they are and where they're flying, and we need to make the public feel safer when drones are flying around. And the FAA and the government's like, okay, great, we can make you feel safer. You can grab your phone, you can see who's flying and why they're flying, and this solves that problem that they've been given to solve. And that's why I don't think that's ever going to change. It's part of remote ID. It has to show up on a public cell phone because that's what the regulators are trying to solve, that problem of the public's fear of drones.
And
It's interesting, though, because
stepping back from this, what is, so what are we doing about it? And so what we're doing is we're working with Vic Moss on areas of that we foresee that the situation of operators and pilots being attacked will get worse with remote ID. So we're taking action and talking to the FAA now, and we will support Vic if in whatever way he would like support. We're also continuing to work on regulations that'll improve the situation. And while we don't agree with all of the points that in the Race Day Quad's litigation, that is obviously yet another approach to combat remote ID. So I think we've got a growing voice in small commercial that works closely with recreational, and we are working collaboratively with within FPVFC to try to get regulations changed, and certainly Brendan, pardon me, Tyler Brennan is taking a different approach,
Mhm.
and the combination of all of those, hopefully, we're all doing something and taking action, which I think is a very positive thing.
I've got to say, though, I think if we look at the results of the last DEC meeting on the gender-specific language, I think everyone I know in the hobby is vehemently opposed to our quadcopters or our model aircraft being called drones. So it shows you how little clout we have as a hobby when the DEC has agreed to change it from unmanned aerial systems to drones. We just don't figure anymore. You may be working very hard, Dave, but the effect of that work is nowhere near what it should be, given the proportion of users that we represent compared to the commercial users. And I feel very sorry for the hobby because we're just totally underrepresented, and things are happening like our name of our product, our craft are being changed to drones, when that's the one thing everybody in the hobby agrees with. We don't want to be called drones. So we had virtually no say in that.
The funny thing is, and my kind of response to that is one of the things I do for this town hall every week is search out articles. And every time it used to be when I typed in drone, drones, or drone news, or any of the things I searched for using the word drone, I would get a variation of military grade stuff. I would get some DJI stuff. I'd get a little bit of FPV stuff. I'd get a little bit of everything, right? Last couple, probably in the last 2 months, drones, the word drones is basically associated with military grade drones right now. And I would agree with you that I don't want them called drones. Unfortunately, that name isn't going anywhere. It's it's basically stuck, and it's not. I think from the beginning, we we as a community maybe didn't oppose it enough, but the retail side of this coin are the ones that coin terms for what things are going to be called when
Yeah.
it comes to this kind of stuff.
Now it's
And
getting enshrined in the
and then
nomenclature, though.
in point of
But
fact, in the gender neutral activity, we had a lot to say. I ran the research on that, and so we did in fact have a very strong voice in that. Yes, the FAA took it on themselves to make the change with respect to the word drone, but I honestly don't feel that was the most important change or uh, piece of work that was done in the gender neutral DAC tasking. It's it's across the FAA. It'll be cross agency, and from a perspective of helping girls and young women, very positive.
The thing, though, as I mentioned in my video, it's actually replacing a gender-neutral term with a gender-specific one. It's completely the opposite of what should have done. Mankind, and there are
Yeah,
plenty of dictionary
I
mankind,
I concede on the term drone. You won't get any arguments from me there. But as I say, yeah, it's to focus just on that term. Yeah, I think loses the picture of the larger context.
Yeah, but what I'm pointing out, though, is you probably worked very hard to try and avoid this. But the one thing that we as a hobby would have felt really grateful for is to not have us lumped in with military grade things. And we are now. The drone is the term. It's the all-embracing term. As a hobby, if we had any clout at all, we should have been able to use that to say, no, we are not drones. Our craft are not drones. Please exclude us from that definition or do something, because otherwise the big problem we've had is that people with DJI Phantoms and Mavics going down filming airports, that's the big, they say it's big, but when was the last time you heard of that actually happening? It's not a big thing anymore. And so we get lumped in with that. I've never seen a story where someone complained that someone was flying a foam model of a Piper Cub over their backyard filming their daughter by the swimming pool. I've never seen freestyle quads causing us anywhere near the issues that a DJI drone causes. And I call a DJI product a drone because it has the ability to fly itself, whereas freestyle quads will not fly themselves, model aircraft will not fly themselves. So we need to make that distinction.
But here's the thing, though, is let's look at it from a different perspective. Okay, so we have things called airplanes. Okay, there are many different types of airplanes that exist out there, but they're all grouped under the nomenclature, airplane. Okay, so same thing here. If you're flying a drone, and let's say I'm talking to somebody at work who has no idea, what a multi-rotor is. If I say the word drone, an image pops into their head of probably something DJI, but that image pops into their head. It's instantly recognizable, and then you can go into the discussion further on down the rabbit hole of, well, actually, what I fly is called a multi-rotor, so on and so forth. I fly FPV. What's FPV? Well, I wear a pair of goggles, and you can go down that rabbit hole, right? But I don't. I honestly, the word itself has never bothered me. It's an easy way to describe things to people, and they pretty much get what you mean. Yeah,
Yep.
I don't like the association with a military grade piece of hardware, but at the same time, it's a greater group of things that you in a conversation can bring down to the level where you need it to be. Now that's not to
So
say
the
that the media is going to do that, but I
So
mean,
the other presentation at the DAC was very important, and I'm afraid it was also very opaque. And we will work to try to bring some clarity to that. And that was the Tasking Group 11 on the Safety Foundation. And so the key takeaway that I tried to reference in that discussion was the target level of safety. And so for those of us who were reading the Operations Over People NPRM in the beginning of 2019, where remember that the FAA was all interested in pushing the notion of minimizing kinetic energy. And they had a rate of 11 foot-pounds, which meant that we would have to slow most of our 5-inch drones down to about 20 miles an hour in order to achieve that level or put parachutes on them. And so, happily, that whole notion of kinetic energy was thrown out when the rule for operations over people was released. And so, this target level of safety is one of the foundation metrics for the safety regimen, which means every rule that we see from now forward, if this DAC recommendation is accepted by the FAA, will have that in it and incorporated instead of number of fatalities, which was their proposed recommendation. So an enormously important and yet again another situation where we had a pretty strong say in this. I was at first interested in throwing out the number of deaths as the safety foundation. Talked then to Google Wing people, and we put forward this target level of safety. So a rather important piece of work, and I'm very optimistic that the FAA will accept that view.
Yeah, it's really hard for people to watch that DAC meeting and have any idea what was going on during that tasking group meeting because they were talking about this document as if everybody had it memorized and read. That's not public, that nobody who's watching the stream has any idea what they're talking about other than this nebulous white paper. So I just even watching that part of the video multiple times, you just can't quite grasp what they're talking about, and they try to explain it to people.
It's a really good point, and that's the situation when we were given that tasking was 90 days, there was a lot of contention, lots of arguments before the fact, so it would just ran right up to the clock and had it produce the report and slides, and it was opaque. Yeah, and there weren't good graphics, not good pictograms or videos that we could help explain it. Well, as I say, we'll work to try to explain that over time.
And I
It's
think
really important.
also, while he was going through the slides during the meeting, there was a missing slide or two that he was trying to talk about that wasn't even in the actual presentation during the live meeting. I think he kept going back and forth saying, oh, I guess they've got an older version of the slide deck or something.
Yeah. That was Manny. TextCheck said, did we consider the risk of a UAS actually killing someone? And the answer to that is yes. And so that was one of the points that I made, is that so statistically, if we use a calculation of numbers of deaths, this is it's lunacy to come up with that type of a calculation. What are we measuring? It's not valid, and it's completely valid with airlines, because people die in airlines, as they have unfortunately with the 737 Max. So the target level of safety has the probability of fatality, but it also has a energy calculation in it, as well as it accounts for the frangibility or the structure of the aircraft. So if I make a UAS or a drone out of foam and it imparts less energy, that makes the whole aircraft safer, because if I hit someone, I have a lower probability of killing them. So yeah, we did talk about fatalities. I know it was somewhat tongue in cheek, but yeah, it was a good and very serious conversation. We looked at other industries, notably automotive, with our NTSB, and lots of numbers and statistics there, and so.
Actually, one thing I'd like to see in those DEC meetings is when people speak, if they can introduce themselves and tell us their affiliation to the industry or the hobby or whatever it is, so we're reminded who's representing what.
Well, that's an interesting point, Bruce, because I've had the privilege of presenting at the DAC 3 times, and when you're presenting, you're not representing your company, and it's it's helpful and
Representing the group's work.
right, and it's usually about 20 to 25 people, and that's why it's so critically important to always show who was on the team and who talked, and that's because you get a good view of oh, so there was one person from recreational, that was Messina, and then there's manned aviation there, and then there are always representation from ALPA, Airline Pilots Association, AOPA, Aircraft Owners Pilots Association, and frequently HAI, Helicopter Association International. All very well funded, bright people with an extreme agenda of their own. I mean, it's important to know who the authors of the paper are.
We should probably go, before we run out of time, go over some of the other highlights of the DAC meeting from last Wednesday.
Yeah.
We could start off with the first, well, I guess, 1.5, 2 topics, which could be a whole hour conversation on their own. That the DAC is no longer called the DAC, or at least they're proposing to change its name from the DAC
It's
to
done.
to the AAAC, or AAAC, which stands for the Advanced Aviation Advisory Committee. So of course they announced that, and then they say, oh, okay, so then we're going to change the name, change the focus a little bit, and we're going to add another, I think it was 5, expanding from 35 members to 41. And for all of like 2 seconds, I was excited, like, oh, great, they can bring in more members, maybe have some more recreational representation. And then they say, and those new members are going to be people with an air mobility background. So then all hopes were dashed, and yeah, now the DAC has an even, I don't know, like,
Greater tilt.
More diluted, because there's the air mobility there is enormous funding and engineering happening across the United States in air mobility, obviously across the world, but great interest in the United States. And so I'm very concerned that this will be a dilution of the focus of the what was the DAC, what now is the AC. As Jay Merkel said,
very appropriate.
Jay Merkel,
That's perfect.
he said it reminded him of his favorite Mars. What was the Mars Attack? Which was, if you'll remember, the Martians went ack, 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 ack. So that image is now permanently stored in my memory.
And when
Okay, so
Volatronics
air
is asking,
mobility-
yep, what is air mobility?
So air mobility can be it could be a helicopter, but let's look at it from this perspective. Tesla's got self-driving cars now, and pretty soon the thought will be, well, we could have pilotless air transport.
It's a
We could
self-driving air
have-
taxi.
Exactly. But you can also think of an air taxi being like a giant multi-rotor that can transport, let's say two people, 4 people from one destination in, let's say, New York City to another destination in New York City. So that kind of project. So there's a couple things that are being discussed, and one of them will for sure be essentially pilotless passenger aircraft. So let's say your 747. They've slowly been reducing the number of seats that for the air crew in terms of in the cockpit. We've went from 3 to 2, and pretty soon to 1. And then possibly in the near future, that one pilot could be a guy on the ground who's flying it remotely. And then that one pilot could then potentially fly 7 aircraft all remotely. And then eventually, as AI and whatnot gets better, it could just be computer controlled. So that's kind of what they're looking at for the future of air mobility. So there's a couple different avenues that you could take that entire segment. So
Right.
So,
And
so
this
now
is-
we can see why the hobby is being even further marginalized. This space is very valuable. We can also see why they've removed the word unmanned, because these will be manned, but they'll still be autonomous or drones. So it all falls into place, doesn't it?
well, I mean,
well, my glass is half full, not half empty. So we'll just, we've got to keep that attitude and keep slugging
I
away.
can't afford the bourbon to fill mine up.
Let's see,
so,
was there anything, what
um,
else, the DAC, then it went into the gender neutral stuff. No TAMs are now going to be called notices to air missions instead of notice to airmen. We went over the whole drone, naming everything a drone thing. They're going to have
There
an
was the-
inclusive language
the-
summit.
The safety culture one was really interesting, and that's what the fella kept going on about. That I've got the wrong slide deck. That is being punted to what is now called DST, the
Which
Drone
used to
Safety
be
Team.
the UAST, right?
UAST, right? And that's an organization that has about 80 members, and the AMA was a member. I'm not sure if they are now, and so I've been working to join what is now the DST. We'll see how that works out. But that whole
So TextJet,
that did surprise me that whole thing was just punted to another organization. Yeah, this sounds good. So I have a hunch that what we will see in the future is more. We'll see a DAC tasking, and then it'll be pushed to the DST, and that will be akin to an ARC. It will be pseudo rulemaking going on. Not pseudo, it's the preparation of recommendations of rulemaking, which will help further refine the problem and get it solved. And but pulling on that thread and getting to be part of the DST obviously is important.
It's like with the one that was sent to the DST, it was almost like the FAA reached out to pilots to get their feedback, didn't like it, brought it to the DAC, asked them to talk to the pilots to get their feedback, didn't really like the response they got there either. Now they're sending it off to the this new group to see if they can get a third answer.
I was trying to get a read on that because throughout the creation of that DAC recommendation, we were in close touch with Jay Merkel and a number of others in the FAA, and it was all very positive, and they were encouraging us to make recommendations. And I've been in a lot of discussions where those topics have come up. So I think that's I take your point, Dan, but
It doesn't quite
hesitant
seem that way.
It does not quite seem that way. Yes.
Let's see, what else happened at the DAC? Then obviously we went into that task group 11, which is difficult to understand, the whole white paper on levels of risk, and FPVFC will hopefully try to distill that some more. And then near the end was tasking group 12, where they're trying to let's see, an interim report on the UAS operations into K through 12 curriculums, right? And
Yeah,
you can probably speak more about that, Dave.
We were. This is a situation we're really happy to have Josh Bixler as one of the members. So we've got AMA is active and participating. AMA has an education program. Flight Test with Josh Bixler being the president has a rather large STEM program. They say they have 5,000 teachers around the world teaching their STEM program, so that's fantastic. And so it's great to have Josh present on these weekly meetings and participating, as well as Chad Boudreau, as well as the education lead from AMA. And so we're picking the push in that group from a perspective of recreational is very strong, and I'm really thrilled about that. So hopefully we'll get something very productive out of that. We have the opportunity. Time will be our biggest challenge. It's an enormous task, but we've got a lot of subject matter experts in the group.
So how did this tasking group get more time than the review of the white paper tasking group?
It was. I thought it was allocated much less. I thought it was allocated to
Well,
about 15 minutes.
No,
But
not as part of the meeting, but as part of, they're just giving an interim report to the FAA now
I
when
see.
the other one had a final report.
How did it get 6 months? And the Safety Foundation. Good question. There was absolutely a request back to the FAA to extend the deadline on TG11, and that request was declined.
Okay. Not saying that the K through 12 stuff is not important or wouldn't take a lot of time, but you would think acceptable levels of risk is pretty important too.
Having worked in senior management, as you move up in an organization, you get to realize that, oh, I didn't realize that. That's why that decision was taken. So there's just so much that we just don't know. And so, the decision, there was a request, it was declined. It could be other schedules, it could be rules that, with other schedules. And that's
Sure.
I don't think it's malice or lack of concern.
Well, on the positive side, the sooner they continue on with that risk, acceptable levels of risk, the sooner that can get incorporated into whatever comes next.
All right, yeah. So I was just looking at
Reading the comments, I'm guessing.
looking at Bruce's comments. Well, Bruce, we're doing something. We're doing something about it. We're an all volunteer organization, and we're making a difference. So I really don't appreciate the constant negativity.
We might not be
Well, I would
making as
say
much of a
that
difference as we hope, but we have been making some differences.
absolutely, and that's what I would say. It's I would say that a lot of the action over the past couple years has been not just us, but a lot of organizations and companies who do side with the recreational operators. And I think one of the current things that we are working with with the FAA is getting them to see the actual applicability and size of the UAS, recreational community. So I think with that, I think we'll see some future action that, my hope is that we are fostering some future action that will spell some very good things for our community, in regards to possibly separation of regulation and more defined areas that make more sense. So, like FPV is capable of doing these things, fixed wing is capable of doing these things, kind of stuff. And I feel like that's an approach that I'm excited to take, and that we've been working so far up to this point. I feel like the droning on after dark, which was kind of pushed by the FAA, and uh, our idea, and implemented from their standpoint, I feel like that was a big win for the recreational community. So, and we're going to continue to push in that regard to, you know, keep the FAA on their toes in terms of the recreational community. So, while certain representation we've fussed about when it comes to like the DAC, um, and we poke fun at the same time it's important. And but that's just one avenue of an approach, whereas we're taking the multi-avenue approach. And other people are taking different approaches, and that's perfectly fine. If you're whether you're Tyler or just the guy down the street that says I'm not going to comply, I get it. This particular approach has yielded results that we're taking. And it may not be the exact thing that everybody in the community wants to see, but it overall has been a net benefit to the community. So just my
There's
two
there's
cents.
there's also the aspect of apathy, and if you want to sit on a couch or in front of a keyboard and just complain and whine and not do anything, that's apathetic. And we're doing something where we are establishing a fantastic reputation within the aviation community, both the uh, drone community as well as the legacy aviation community, and we're getting a larger and larger following and support in the FPV community, as well as FPV drone racing, as well as RC community. So it's positive, and I mean we are all volunteer, and we're passionate about it, and we're doing something about it. And so uh, I choose not to be apathetic.
I am still a bit optimistic. There's some good stuff that I've been seeing in the Beyond Visual Line of Sight arc, and I really hope that continues and makes its way into the final recommendation to the FAA, and hopefully it stays and the FAA goes with those recommendations. But like has been posted in the chat, we won't know until it happens. We'll just have to wait and see, and hopefully as much of that as possible will become public in the future.
So I would agree with TextJet, that bureaucracy, it takes a long time for things to get done. And we've seen that firsthand, but that doesn't deter us to continue to push down that path. So
Yeah,
You
there's an
know,
interesting aspect of the timing in the FAA as the drone regulations have happened at light speed in their view, and
mhm,
so they look at manned aviation regulations as something like remote ID would have taken 10 years and it took 2. And so by their standard, they think they're moving incredibly quickly.
extremely fast. Yeah.
And they recognize that with respect to the rest of the world, that they are not moving fast enough and have to move a lot more quickly, and that's why they are changing. That's one of the reasons the TG11 was so important. And it's also why they're looking to standards bodies like ASTM to do a lot of the work and pick it up and move it more quickly.
I would agree that this seems to be moving really fast, and even with my own little tiny anecdote with working with my local city council, trying to get some mountain bike approval to build mountain bike trails in our local city. When we started, we were told, oh, a project like that will probably take you 10 years to get approved. It took us 7. So it took 7 years to get approval for some mountain bike trails. So I mean, it was faster than expected, but it does take a long time.
Still takes time. Gotta have patience. Gotta see the long view.
So here's the thing I would say is that, while, you know, critique is absolutely welcome, and we want to hear from everybody. I would, just ask you to understand that our approach is our approach, your approach is your approach, and neither one of them is wrong. I think, all approaches can yield results. I think by choosing not to be combative instead working within the framework of the FAA, we've been able to make an impact. I'm not saying nobody else has made an impact. What I am saying is that our impact has been documented. So,
And Race Day Quads
um,
is taking the combative approach. So
absolutely, and I don't fault any. I don't fault them for that. It's fine. Um, I don't fault anybody for any approach that they choose to take, as long as the result yields what we need it to be. But also keep in mind that being combative doesn't gain you long term viability, and we as an organization are seeking that long term viability so that we can continue to affect change down the road. Um, so I just don't want to. I don't want to burn bridges and not be able to be in on the conversations when we need to be in on them. If that makes
Yeah,
sense.
our work in the various DAC taskings got us invited to the Beyond Visual Line of Sight arc, and that's it's a it is a very significant piece of work, and so hopefully it will have significant impact as well.
yeah, I was a little surprised this
So
last DAC, this last ACK, didn't have a new tasking at the end. So everybody gets to take a break, right? And I'm guessing they're
I
coming up with new taskings related to air mobility.
And I would also imagine that the BV loss arc will be a topic of February.
Hmm.
yeah. Also, keep in mind that we are kind of expecting a December-ish drop of CBO regulations. I would expect that at the 11th hour on December 30th or 31st, as per usual when it comes to drone regulations in the FAA.
It's almost like they've
So
got some sort of a reason they have to get them pushed out before the new year or something, but I don't think there is such a thing.
it's so weird.
It's like December is just
But it's
like
just like,
FAA month, and then last minute.
well, it's funny because I wonder if when they did it last time with remote ID, they're like, nobody will notice this. And then 53,000 comments roll in, and they're just like,
Can you imagine if they
shit.
posted it during a time when people were paying attention?
But anywho, all right. So with that, I think we've gone well over. And I'm gonna give you back the evening. Thank you for the participation. We love having you guys talk and give us some feedback, and even just chatting in the Discord is great. So We will be here. Let's see. Hold on.
Oh yeah, is 2 weeks Thanksgiving or not? Are we going to be off in 2 weeks?
Nope, that's the 17th. So we should be groovy. It's the week after that.
Okay.
But
So see
yeah,
you guys
I
all in
think
2
we'll be
weeks.
good on the 17th. Yeah, absolutely. So, and with that, have a great night. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.